In this part, we will speak about the specific features of emerging markets, opportunities and risks. For the last 2 decades, the interest for the emerging markets has increased dramatically. These economies present significant opportunities for investment and payback, vast consumer markets, the source of cheap resources, and the field to exercise economic and political powers. Emerging market is a term that investors use to describe a developing country in which investment would be expected to achieve higher returns but be accomplished by greater risk. Emerging markets comprise half of the world's population and more than 1/5 of global GDP. And these figures are still rapidly growing. In spite of all seeming attractiveness of emerging markets, there are some specific features that we should consider. They are market heterogeneity, socio-political governance, chronic shortage of resources, inadequate infrastructure, unbranded competition. Let's have a deeper look at them. Emerging markets are not homogeneous. They present large variants of sub-markets, which are mostly local, fragmented, and comparatively small. Prepare to face the reality of pre-industrialization here. Handicraft industries with poor standards are dominant, while the consumption pyramid demonstrates large skewness. The growth of companies, markets, and areas are driven more by resource constraints with affordability and accessibility at the consumption basis. The rules of the game here are not always evident and may change really quickly. Emerging markets are influenced greatly by social and political factors. There are numerous government-owned and operated enterprises. Most of them are monopoly powers. At a general scope, you may find that only a few highly diversified trading and industrial groups dominate significantly. These groups have access to and influence on government's planning and policy changes. In a practical sense, this means that a significant part of the markets are neither competitive nor free. You will have to cooperate with the influencers or take the restrictions for granted. Another distinctive feature of an emerging market is the chronic shortage of resources. Electricity and raw materials are insufficient and are supplied in a spotty way. Besides, the markets suffer from the lack of skill-based labor. Production is sporadic, inconsistent, and non-replicable in many spheres, where the consumption is often constrained and is oriented towards low-cost, affordable products and services. This means you will have to struggle for insufficient resources and be prepared for high expenditures. Probably the most evident peculiarity of emerging markets is inadequate infrastructure. You need to face insufficient physical roads, logistics, and storage. So managing just-in-time deliveries may be really hard, if not impossible. There is significant lack of communication, information, and transaction technologies. Be prepared to spare much more time for those issues. However, I must admit that many metro areas may have adequate infrastructure. While the traditional channels are poor, the use of non-traditional channels and innovative access to consumers may be both necessary and profitable. This may be surprising, but about 60% of consumption in emerging markets refers to unbranded products. Branded products and services are often not available in rural markets. The power of brands in emerging markets is not very high, while the consumers are mostly not loyal and price-oriented. Take into account that a household here is not just a consumption unit, but also a production unit that is ready to substitute some goods and services offered. It is also interesting that used product prevailed as a direct competitor to new products. There are many barter exchange deals and reciprocal offerings. Besides, each company provides all the necessary processes itself. Outsourcing is minimal. This all demands to rethink common post-industrial business paradigm and search for particular opportunities within particular environment. As far as our throughout story takes place in Russian Federation, let's have a brief look at this emerging market. With 146 million people and more than 3.5 trillion of GDP, Russia demonstrates both the growth of production and the growth of consumption. Along with developed technologies and intense government-supported investment, Russia tends to be one of the most promising economies for close future eyes. So, What presents the main opportunities for doing business in Russia? The first one is educated population. The Russian education system is excellent. Almost 43% of Russian adults are college graduates, and almost 90% of high school students graduate. Russia has one of the world's highest literacy rates, so most of the people can function in a modern economy. The country has people who can do whatever work needs to be done. Second is strong financial system. After the 1998 default, the Russian economy was completely restructured. Russians concentrated on making their own system strong in the absence of outside investors and with banks taking a hard line on risk. As a result, the 2008 global financial crisis was not that severe in Russia, and the economy restored comparatively fast. Third is rich natural resources. Being one of the world's leading producers of oil and gas, Russia produces iron ore and gold too. Russia has rich agricultural soil and is a net exporter of grain and timber. The resources are comparatively cheap and easily accessible here. Russia can sustain its own people and can provide food and materials to other nations. The growth in India and China creates demand for Russia's resources. However, we should consider the risks too. There are many. One of the most significant risks is demographic. The population is aging and there is a significant brain drain. The average age of the population in Russia is 38.5 years, and the birth rate is below replacement rate. This situation raises the question of whether Russia will have enough workers to support its retirees and enough workers and consumers to support a more diversified economic base. On top of the decline in birth rate, Russian scientists and engineers have a long story of leaving for greener pastures in other countries. However, as Russia's economy becomes more stable, the people will feel more confident about the future, which in turn will boost the birth rate and lower immigration. Another significant risk is connected with corruption and crime. Russia has a long-standing culture of corruption. That corruption scares off foreign investors. Furthermore, Russia had a bit of lawless era after the Soviet government fell, and organized criminals stepped into the void in many cities. However, the government has been addressing the issue, and if investors notice a real change, Russia will become a more attractive place to do business. But now corruption is the reality that must be taken into account. The third major risk is significant reliance on the key industry. The Russian economy is based on oil and gas. That's good because global demand for carbon-based fuel is huge and growing. However, by being so narrowly focused, the Russian economy is directly exposed to price fluctuations. Also, the planet's oil and gas will be used up someday. The lack of diversity in Russia's economy creates a big challenge over the long term. On the plus side, Russia has a potential to have a more diverse economy. It has a range of natural resources and geography, and its people are talented. Diversification should happen. In practical sense, that means that many industries are now in the very beginning of their business evolution. Competition is not yet strong, and the outstanding results may be achieved quickly. When I was thinking about creating a new business school, I had to take into account 4 specific traits of business education market in Russia. First, there are still almost no established standards. Each institution sticks to its own vision of products, educational purposes, and results. There are no specific certifications or licenses. Even such traditional standards as MBA degree has a variety of accepted interpretations, while MBA programs differ incomparably. Although several universities have developed high professional standards close to those in the US and Europe, the majority of market players still have a dim vision of what good business education is. Second, the demand is still unsatisfied. The majority of clients do not have clear understanding of their needs and have difficulties in choosing a proper educational product. The post-evaluation of educational experience is primarily not rational but emotional and often ends up with dissatisfaction. Many companies and individuals are ready to invest in boosting their managerial competencies. However, very often they are not able to find a local provider that would respond to their demands. This results in postponing or rejecting the need. Third, the market is rapidly growing. For the past 10 years, it has grown more than 20 times. Although now the speed of growth is decreasing, the market is far from its satisfaction. The fourth peculiarity is the lack of specialization. The absolute majority of the offered programs are comprehensive and generalized. They are provided mostly by academic lecturers or by generalist consultants with unspecialized experience. During the recent few years, there has appeared a number of specialized programs, although their total coverage is less than insignificant. All these features support numerous opportunities for a small business school. When evaluating VBS perspectives 3 years ago, I decided to benchmark international professional standards of business education and introduce them to this messy environment. As far as the demand was unsatisfied, I did not have to create a completely new need or a set of values. Instead, it was much more practical to study current needs and make an offer where many lacked competence or responsibility. Rapid market growth meant that the scalability of business was much more important than reducing costs or improving quality. Finally, the domination of generalized programs in the market dictated me to focus on a specific market group and design an attractive offer. This would let me provide a more attractive value pack, while still keeping the potential target audience wide. Copying the accepted generalized approach would make differentiation harder, while focusing at specific content type could dangerously limit the number of potential clients. Pondering over these criteria led me to the following conclusions. First, focus on corporate education. That is the necessary differentiation with less number of potential clients and more average consumption per each. Second, design standard programs that could satisfy about 80% and provide scalability with minimum adaptation required. Third, focus on the typical problems of corporate clients that potentially can be dealt with educational problems, though still not supported properly. And fourth, reproduce some of the standards of business education accepted in the advanced markets to make the hallmark of VBS. Thus, I got the general sketch of a future business model that suited the specific market environment and could proceed with designing value propositions. Let's sum it up. We've talked about the peculiarities of emerging markets. Among the most distinctive features, we've highlighted market heterogeneity, socio-political governance, chronic shortage of supplies, inadequate infrastructure, and unbranded competition. We've noticed that Russia has a high percentage of educated people, strong financial system, and lots of natural resources. The major risks of doing business here is aging population, brain drain, corruption, and exceeding reliance on a key industry. Business education market in Russia is growing rapidly. Although it still has no definite widely accepted professional standards, the demand is unsatisfied and the offers are not specialized. This helped us to conclude that standard programs of corporate education, focusing on some typical problems of companies, reproducing some recognizable international standards, could possibly be a success.